I came home early and found my husband in the bathtub with my sister, so I locked the door from the outside, and then I called my brother-in-law and told him, "You better get over here right now." 15 minutes later, he showed up, but he did not come alone. My name is Audrey, and at 34 years old, I never expected to be standing on the wrong side of a locked door in my own house, listening to my life fall apart. I have always been the responsible one, the planner, the fixer, while my younger sister Brittany was the golden child who could do no wrong. I built a career as a creative director and bought this beautiful home in Seattle, while Brittany drifted through life relying on her charm and our parents' money. Today, that dynamic was about to change forever. It was 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was supposed to be on a flight to Chicago for a client pitch, but a mechanical failure grounded the plane. I decided to come home and surprise my husband Grant. I did not text him. I just wanted to curl up on the couch with him and forget about work. When I walked into the foyer, the house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy. I kicked off my heels on the marble floor, and that is when I heard it. The faint rhythmic sound of water splashing and the hum of the jacuzzi jets coming from the master suite upstairs. I frowned because Grant told me he had back-to-back meetings all day. I walked up the floating staircase, my stocking feet making no sound. As I got closer to the bedroom, the sounds became distinct. There was laughter, a high-pitched giggling that I had known my entire life. It was Brittany. My stomach dropped, but my mind refused to believe it. Maybe she was just visiting. Maybe she was downstairs and the sound was carrying. But as I reached the open door of the master bedroom, the trail of clothes told a different story. My husband's tie was draped over the armchair. My sister's bright red dress was in a heap on the floor. The bathroom door was cracked open just an inch, letting steam escape. I crept closer, holding my breath. I peered through the gap. The sight burned itself into my retinas instantly. Grant was in the tub and Brittany was sitting across from him. They were drinking my expensive champagne. Grant was laughing at something she said and tracing his finger along her arm. The intimacy was undeniable. They looked comfortable, like this was a routine, not a mistake. In that moment, I could have screamed. I could have kicked the door open and thrown a vase, but a cold calm washed over me. I am a businesswoman. I do not react emotionally, I strategize. I slowly pulled the heavy oak door closed. It made a soft click. They did not hear it over the noise of the jets. I reached into my purse and pulled out my keyring. Grant always teased me for carrying the master skeleton key that could lock every interior door in the house. He called it my control freak habit. Today, it was my weapon. I inserted the old-fashioned brass key into the deadbolt on the outside of the bathroom door. I turned it once. Click. I turned it twice. Click. The lock was solid. They were trapped inside my bathroom, naked and oblivious. Before I continue this story, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I leaned my back against the door, listening to the water churn. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I did not call the police yet. I called Damon, my brother-in-law, Brittany's husband. He answered on the second ring. "Damon," I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "You need to come to my house right now." "Why?" he asked, sensing the ice in my tone. "Because I have a package here that belongs to you," I whispered. "And bring the red envelope." He did not ask questions. He just hung up. I looked at my watch. The show was about to begin. The silence inside the bathroom lasted exactly 3 seconds before the handle rattled violently. It was the frantic, desperate sound of metal grinding against a solid brass deadbolt. Grant shouted my name. His voice was muffled by the thick oak, but the panic in it was crystal clear. "Audrey, open this door right now. This is not funny." The water splashing stopped abruptly, replaced by the wet slap of bare feet on tile. I did not answer. I simply leaned my full weight against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. I could feel the vibrations against my spine as he pounded his fist on the wood. It was a rhythmic thud 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 that matched the beating of my own heart, not out of fear, but out of a strange, cold adrenaline. Brittany's voice joined in shrill and demanding. "Let me out, you psycho! My clothes are out there. You cannot keep us in here." I closed my eyes and let a small, humorless smile touch my lips. Just 24 hours ago, Grant had kissed my forehead at the door, his suitcase packed with heavy coats. He looked me in the eye and said, "Chicago is freezing this time of year. I will miss you, honey." At the exact same time, Brittany had sent a photo to our family group chat of a cucumber water glass captioned, "Spa Day, Self-Care Needed." Lies. Just layers upon layers of cheap, predictable lies. They thought they were so clever coordinating their stories, thinking I was too busy closing deals to notice the inconsistencies. But they forgot that my job involves noticing the details everyone else misses. The pounding intensified. I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. My fingers hovered over the screen. The background was still a photo of Grant and me from our anniversary in Napa. I swiped it away without hesitation. I opened my messages with Damon. We had not spoken much lately aside from polite nods at family gatherings, but I knew he was the only other person in this family who valued loyalty over appearances. I typed quickly, "Come to my house immediately. Do not ask questions." Then I added a second line, "Bring the red package." I hit send. I watched the delivered status turn to read almost instantly. Damon was an architect. He was precise, punctual, and he knew exactly what the red package contained. It was a fail-safe we had discussed once jokingly over scotch at Christmas 2 years ago. We never thought we would actually need to use it. Inside the bathroom, the aggression shifted to bargaining. Grant's voice dropped an octave, trying to sound reasonable. "Baby, come on. It is not what it looks like. We were just talking." I slipped in the tub by accident and Brittany was helping me up. "Please, just unlock the door and we can explain everything." Explain! That was rich. I took a step away from the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, purposefully loud, so they would know I was still there listening. I walked over to the nightstand where Grant kept his expensive watch collection. I picked up his favorite Rolex, the one I bought him when he got his honorary promotion. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of the gold. "You have 15 minutes, Grant," I said, loud enough for them to hear, but keeping my voice steady. "Use them to come up with a better lie than slipping in the tub. And Brittany, I hope you enjoy the steam. It is good for the pores." I walked out of the bedroom and stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the foyer. My house had never looked more beautiful. The afternoon light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was peaceful out here. But behind that locked door, I had just started a war. And unlike them, I had brought ammunition. Grant's tactics shifted with terrifying speed. The aggressive pounding stopped and was replaced by a soft knuckles rap against the wood. When he spoke again, his voice was dripping with that condescending calmness he used whenever I questioned his spending habits. "Audrey, baby, please listen to reason," he said. "You are blowing this out of proportion." Brittany felt faint. She has had those dizzy spells lately, remember? She almost collapsed on the tile. I was just helping her get into the water to cool down. I did not want her to crack her head open. It was a lie so lazy it was almost insulting. He was trying to gaslight me through 3 inches of solid oak. He actually expected me to believe that the remedy for a fainting spell was stripping naked and drinking vintage champagne. He was banking on my history of being the fixer, the one who smoothed things over to avoid a scene. But the Audrey who fixed things had died the moment I saw his hand on her arm. Brittany, however, had no patience for the long con. She was done pretending. Her voice cut through Grant's soothing tone like a serrated knife. "Oh, stop it, Grant," she snapped. "Stop trying to protect her feelings. She does not have any." I could hear her moving closer to the door. I imagined her pressing her face against the wood, her wet hair dripping on my floor. "You want to know the truth, Audrey," she yelled. "Here it is. You are an ice queen. You treat this marriage like a merger and acquisition. You are never home. You are always flying off to some client dinner while Grant sits here alone. He needed a real woman. Someone who knows how to prioritize a husband over a quarterly report. You drove him to this. This is your fault. Her words were designed to shatter me. She targeted my deepest insecurity that my ambition somehow made me unlovable. But instead of tears, I felt a surge of cold power. She was admitting it. She was justifying betraying her own sister because she wanted what was mine. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was a predator. I did not scream back. I did not justify my career that paid for the roof over their heads and the very water they were soaking in. Arguing would only give them the satisfaction of knowing they hurt me. Instead, I walked over to the smart home control panel mounted on the wall near the staircase. It was a state-of-the-art system that linked every room in the house. I tapped the screen. I selected the input source as master bedroom intercom. Then I selected the output zone as whole house. I turned the volume dial all the way to maximum. Suddenly, the speakers in the foyer, the kitchen, the living room, and even the basement media room crackled to life. Brittany's voice was no longer muffled behind a door. It was booming from the ceiling like a deity of betrayal. "You are pathetic, Audrey!" Her amplified voice thundered through the house, shaking the crystal chandelier in the hallway. "Grant has been miserable for years. He told me he only stayed because of the money." I stood there in the hallway listening to her destroy her own reputation. Every word was being broadcasted to the main floor where the cleaning staff would be starting their shift in 10 minutes. I wanted every corner of this estate to absorb their toxicity so that when I kicked them out, the house would finally be clean. "Keep talking, Brittany," I whispered to myself. "Dig that hole a little deeper." I walked down the floating staircase, leaving the chaos upstairs behind me. Brittany's voice was still echoing through the speakers, ranting about how I was a terrible sister and a worse wife, but down here in the expansive kitchen, it was just background noise. It sounded like a desperate podcast I had no interest in subscribing to. I reached for the bottle of Cabernet sitting on the granite island. It was a vintage Grant had bought for our 5-year anniversary. He had made a toast that night, about our future, about building a legacy together. I popped the cork with a satisfying pop and poured a generous glass. I held it up to the light, watching the deep red liquid swirl. I figured the destruction of a marriage was a special enough occasion to open the good wine. As I took the first sip, the adrenaline began to settle and clarity took its place. The truth was, I had not been blind. I had been waiting. 6 months ago, I noticed the first discrepancy in our joint account. It was small, just a dinner for two at a steakhouse on a Tuesday when Grant said he was working late. Then came the cash withdrawals. $500 here, $1,000 there. He labeled them as client entertainment in our budget app. But I knew Grant's clients. They were health nuts who drank green juice, not scotch, and they certainly did not shop at the lingerie boutique where a $2,000 charge appeared last November. I remembered asking him about it. He looked me dead in the eye and said he bought a gift for his mother's birthday. I called his mother later that week to wish her a happy birthday. She told me Grant had sent her a card. Just a card. That was the moment the love died. That was the moment I stopped being a wife and started being a forensic accountant. I did not confront him then because I did not have the smoking gun. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to catch them in a way that left no room for gaslighting, no room for excuses, and absolutely no room for them to claim half of my assets in a divorce settlement. I swirled the wine in the glass again. Today I got my proof. It was uglier than I imagined. I thought it might be a secretary or an old college flame. I never let myself believe it would be Brittany, my own flesh and blood, the sister whose tuition I paid, the sister whose hand I held when she got her tonsils out. The betrayal did not break my heart, it hardened it. It turned my sadness into a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. Suddenly, the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the house, silencing the screaming from the speakers for a brief second. I set my wineglass down on a coaster. I checked my reflection in the dark window. My lipstick was still perfect. My blazer was unwrinkled. I did not look like a victim. I looked like the CEO of my own life. I walked to the front door. I could see the silhouette of a tall, broad-shouldered man through the frosted glass. Beside him were two uniformed shapes. My reinforcements had arrived. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Damon stood there looking impeccable in his charcoal suit, but his eyes were dark with a fury he was barely containing. I stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Welcome to the party," I said dryly. "The entertainment is upstairs and they are dying to see you." Damon did not smile. He just nodded to the officers and stepped across the threshold, carrying a thick red envelope that held the power to end Grant's life as he knew it. Damon did not say a word as he stepped into the foyer. He did not need to. His presence alone commanded the space in a way Grant never could. Flanking him were two uniformed police officers looking stern and official, and Ms. Parker, my family's estate attorney who had served my grandmother for 30 years. She adjusted her glasses and gave me a curt nod of acknowledgement. "Audrey, Ms. Parker," said her voice crisp and professional. "We have the documents you requested, the deed, the trust agreement, and the restraining order application." I gestured toward the stairs where Brittany's voice was still screeching from the speakers, though it had grown hoarse and repetitive. "They are upstairs," I said. "Master suite." One of the officers, a tall man with a buzz cut, looked at Damon. "Sir, are you the property owner?" Damon shook his head and pointed at me. "No, officer. My sister-in-law is the sole owner. I am just the witness, but I do have authorization to act on her behalf regarding security matters." He pulled a folded document from his inside jacket pocket and handed it to the officer. It was a notarized copy of the property deed clearly stating the ownership under the A&D Trust. The officer scanned the paper quickly, then looked up at me. "Ma'am, do you want these individuals removed from your property?" I looked him in the eye. "I want them removed, prosecuted for trespassing, and I want a full report filed. They have refused to leave after being asked multiple times." "Understood," the officer said. He signaled to his partner. "Let's go." We moved as a unit up the floating staircase. The sound of our footsteps was a heavy, rhythmic march of judgment. As we reached the landing, Brittany's voice cut out abruptly. She must have heard the heavy boots on the hardwood. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than her screaming. Damon walked beside me, his expression unreadable. I knew what this moment cost him. He loved Brittany once. He had built her a studio. He had tolerated her tantrums. But betrayal has a way of erasing history. Today he was not a husband coming to save his wife. He was an architect coming to inspect a demolition. We stopped outside the master bedroom door. The silence inside was suffocating. They knew someone was out here, but they did not know who. They probably expected Grant's mother, or maybe just me coming back to surrender. "Open it," Damon said softly. I reached for the key still in the lock. My hand did not tremble. I turned the deadbolt back. Click, click. I pushed the door open. The steam had dissipated, leaving the room damp and smelling of my expensive bath salts. Grant and Brittany stood in the center of the room, shivering. They were dripping wet, clutching my white Egyptian cotton towels around their bodies like pathetic togas. Their eyes went wide when they saw the wall of people standing in the hallway. Grant's face turned a ghostly shade of pale when he saw the uniforms. Brittany just stared at Damon, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Honey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Damon did not answer. He just stepped aside to let the police officers enter the room. The flash of a camera went off blindingly bright. Ms. Parker was already at work documenting the scene for the courtroom. The heavy oak door swung inward, revealing the humid sanctuary that had become a crime scene of betrayal. The steam that billowed out smelled of lavender and eucalyptus, a scent I had associated with relaxation, but would now forever associate with deceit. The scene before us was pathetic in its clarity. Grant and Brittany were scrambling out of the porcelain tub, clutching my white Egyptian cotton towels against their wet skin like shields. The water was still churning in the jacuzzi, creating a surreal soundtrack to their humiliation. Ms. Parker stepped forward before anyone could speak. She was a woman of 60 with a spine of steel, and she raised her digital camera with the precision of a sniper. Click, click, click. The flash was blinding in the dim mood lighting of the bathroom, illuminating every detail of their infidelity. The expensive champagne bottle sitting on the edge of the tub, the two half-empty glasses, the way Brittany's wet hair was plastered to her face, and the terrified look in Grant's eyes as he realized his life was unraveling frame by frame. "Stop it!" Grant screamed, holding up a hand to block the lens. "You cannot do this! This is illegal! Get that camera out of my face!" Ms. Parker lowered the camera slightly, but did not stop recording. "Actually, Grant, it is perfectly legal," she said calmly. "This is a residence owned by my client. You are currently engaging in adulterous behavior, which violates the morality clause in your prenuptial agreement. These images are simply necessary documentation for the imminent divorce proceedings." Smile. Brittany looked past the lawyer and locked eyes with Damon. I expected her to cry or beg for forgiveness. I expected her to run to him, but she just froze. She saw the two police officers standing behind him, their hands resting near their belts, and she realized the gravity of the situation. "Damon," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the jets. "Damon, please let me explain." Damon did not step into the room. He stood in the doorway like a statue towering over the scene. He looked at his wife of 3 years, standing naked next to her sister's husband, and his expression remained terrifyingly blank. There was no rage, there was no heartbreak. It was the look of a man who had already grieved the death of his marriage long before he walked into this room. "Save your breath," Brittany Damon said. His voice was deep and steady, devoid of any warmth. "I saw the text messages. I saw the hotel receipts from last month. I just needed to see this to make sure I was not crazy." He looked at Grant with pure disgust. "You two deserve each other." The shame in the room was palpable. Grant tried to muster some authority, puffing out his chest despite being wrapped in a towel. "You brought the cops," he spat, looking at me. "You really are a cold-hearted witch, Audrey. We were just comforting each other because you are so emotionally unavailable." I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound that cut through the humidity. "Comforting each other," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" I turned to the officers. "Officers, I would like these two individuals removed from my property immediately. They do not live here, and their presence is causing me significant distress." Grant's jaw dropped. "You cannot kick me out. I live here. This is my house too." I shook my head slowly, savoring the moment. "No, Grant. You just sleep here. And as of this moment, your lease has expired." The transformation from cowering adulterer to self-righteous victim took Grant exactly 30 seconds. He scrambled into his trousers, hopping on one foot while still shouting orders. He did not even button his shirt properly before he turned his aggression toward the officers. "Officer, I demand you arrest this woman immediately," he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She locked us in here against our will. That is false imprisonment. That is kidnapping. I know my rights." It was a bold strategy. He was trying to pivot the narrative from his infidelity to my reaction. He wanted to make the lock on the door the crime rather than the betrayal that happened behind it. He looked at the police with wide, pleading eyes, channeling every ounce of his charm that had once fooled me. "You have to understand, my wife is not well. She has been under a lot of stress at work. She is delusional. She sees things that are not there." I stood next to Ms. Parker and watched him perform. It was fascinating in a grotesque sort of way. He was building a reality where he was the innocent husband tending to a sick sister-in-law, and I was the deranged, jealous wife who hallucinated an affair. Grant continued his tirade, stepping closer to the taller officer. "She has been paranoid for months. She accuses me of sleeping with everyone. The barista, the neighbor, now her own sister. It is sick. We were just in here because Brittany felt faint and needed water. Audrey locked the door and refused to let us out. We were terrified. She is dangerous. You need to take her into custody for a psychiatric evaluation." Brittany caught on quickly. She wrapped a silk robe around herself and let out a sob that sounded practiced. "He is right," she sniffled, wiping away a fake tear. Audrey has always been jealous of me. She has always wanted what I have. She locked us in here to humiliate us. I was scared for my life, officer. I thought she was going to burn the house down. The officer looked from Grant to Brittany and then back to me. His expression did not change. He had likely seen hundreds of domestic disputes, and he knew the smell of a lie. He looked at the deadbolt on the door and then down at his notepad. Sir, let me get this straight. You are claiming your wife imprisoned you, but you are currently standing in a master bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, half-empty champagne glasses, and your clothes scattered on the floor. And you want me to arrest the homeowner for locking a door in her own house. Grant sputtered, his face turning red. It does not matter what it looks like. The law is the law. She restricted my movement. I finally spoke, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a razor. Grant, you are free to move now. In fact, I am encouraging you to move. Right out the front door. Grant sneered at me, dropping the victim act for a split second. I am not going anywhere, Audrey. This is my house. You cannot kick me out just because you are having a psychotic break. Officer, tell her she cannot kick me out of my marital home. He crossed his arms triumphantly, convinced that the law protected his residency. He thought that because he received his mail here and slept in my bed, he had squatter's rights. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between a husband and a tenant. Brittany watched her husband step fully into the bathroom, and her expression shifted from fear to a strange sort of anticipation. She knew Damon was a passionate man. In her twisted mind, she probably expected him to lunge at Grant, to throw a punch, to scream until his voice gave out. She expected a crime of passion because in her world, jealousy was the ultimate form of flattery. She tightened the towel around her chest and took a step toward him, her eyes welling up with fresh tears, preparing to play the part of the confused wife who made a terrible mistake. Damon, honey, please say something, she whimpered, reaching a trembling hand out toward him. I was so lonely. Grant was just listening to me. We did not mean for it to happen. Damon did not flinch. He did not look at her hand. He did not look at Grant, who was still puffing his chest out by the sink. Damon simply reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. The movement was slow and deliberate. Brittany flinched, expecting a weapon. In a way it was. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was not the red envelope I had asked for, that one was for later. This was something personal. He extended his arm and held it out to her. His hand was steady, rock steady. What is this? Brittany asked, her voice barely a whisper. Take it, Damon said. His tone was not angry. It was exhausted. She reached out and took the envelope. Her wet fingers left marks on the paper. She opened the flap and pulled out the document inside. The bold black letters at the top were visible even from where I stood. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Brittany gasped and dropped the papers on the wet tile. You are divorcing me, she shrieked, looking up at him with disbelief. Over one mistake. Damon, we can go to counseling. We can fix this. You cannot just throw away 3 years of marriage because of one misunderstanding. Damon let out a short, bitter laugh. One mistake, he repeated, shaking his head. Brittany, do not insult my intelligence. Do not stand there wrapped in your sister's towel and lie to my face one last time. He took a step closer, towering over her. I installed a GPS tracker on your Range Rover 6 weeks ago. I did it after you came home smelling like Grant's cologne and told me you had been at yoga. Brittany's face went white. Grant stopped his posturing and slumped against the counter, realizing the depth of the hole they were in. I know about the Motel 6 off the interstate. Damon continued, ticking the locations off on his fingers. I know about the lunch dates at that French bistro on 4th Avenue, where you held hands across the table. I know about the 3 times you parked in this driveway when Audrey was out of town. I have the logs, Brittany. I have the timestamps. I have the mileage. He looked at her with a profound sense of pity. I did not come here today to fight for you. I came here to serve you. You are free now. You can have him. Brittany looked at Grant, then back at Damon, realizing that her safety net was gone. She had not just lost a husband, she had lost her lifestyle, her stability, and her reputation. Damon turned his back on her. He looked at me, and for the first time since he arrived, his eyes softened. "I am sorry you had to see this, Audrey," he said. "I am not," I replied. "I prefer the truth, however ugly it is." Grant tried to speak up again, sensing the power dynamic shifting. "You cannot track people without their consent, that is stalking." Damon glanced over his shoulder. "Actually, Grant, the car is in my name. I can track my own property wherever I want. Just like Audrey can evict whoever she wants." He walked out of the bathroom, leaving the divorce papers soaking up the water on the floor, a fitting end to a marriage built on lies. The silence he left behind was heavier than any scream could have been. Grant's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed violently with the white towel wrapped around his waist. He looked at Damon's retreating back, and then spun around to face me, his eyes bulging with a mix of rage and panic. He realized he was losing control of the narrative, and his instinct was to get louder, to assert dominance through sheer volume. "This is insane," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You cannot just kick me out. This is my house. My name is on the mailbox outside. My name is on the electric bill. I have lived here for 5 years, Audrey. That establishes residency. That establishes ownership. You cannot just evict a husband from his own home like he is some kind of squatter." He marched over to the vanity counter where a stack of mail was sitting. He grabbed a utility envelope and shoved it toward the police officer's face. "Look at this. Grant Harrison. That is me. This proves this is my legal residence. Tell her she cannot make me leave. Tell her that if she wants me out, she has to go through a court eviction process that takes months." The police officer looked at the crumpled envelope and then at Ms. Parker. He looked bored. He had clearly seen this desperation before. He gestured to the lawyer. "Ma'am, do you have the documentation you mentioned earlier?" Ms. Parker stepped forward. Her movements were calm and precise, contrasting sharply with Grant's frantic energy. She opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a document with a blue cover and a gold seal. She did not hand it to Grant. She handed it to the officer. "Officer," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "what Mr. Harrison is holding is a bill for electricity usage. What I am handing you is the warranty deed and the declaration of trust for this property." Grant froze. "Trust?" he stammered. "What trust?" Ms. Parker turned to him and adjusted her glasses. "The A&D Family Trust, Grant. Established by Audrey's grandmother 20 years ago. The property we are standing in was purchased by that trust long before you met Audrey. The trust is the sole legal owner of this estate. Audrey is the sole beneficiary. You are not listed on the deed. You are not listed as a trustee. You are not even listed as a tenant." She paused to let the words sink in. "Legally speaking, Mr. Harrison, you are a guest who has been allowed to stay here at the pleasure of the beneficiary. And as of 10 minutes ago, that pleasure has been revoked." I watched the realization hit him. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. He looked at me, his mouth gaping open. "You never told me the house was in a trust." I took a sip of my wine, which I had carried up from the kitchen. "I did not have to tell you, Grant," I said calmly. "You never asked. You were so happy living in luxury driving cars you did not pay for, and sleeping in a house you did not buy, that you never bothered to ask whose name was actually on the paper. You just assumed that because you married me, you owned me and everything I have." Ms. Parker continued, twisting the knife with legal precision. "Since there is no lease agreement and you have made no mortgage payments, you have no claim to tenancy rights. The homeowner has revoked your permission to be on the premises. Therefore, your continued presence here constitutes criminal trespass." The officer looked up from the document. "The paperwork looks solid, ma'am." He turned to Grant and pointed to the door. "Sir, you have 5 minutes to get dressed and vacate the premises. If you are still here in 6 minutes, you will be arrested for trespassing. And sir, if you damage anything on your way out, we will add vandalism to the charges." Grant looked around the room, looking for an ally, looking for a loophole, but there was none. The walls he thought he owned were closing in on him. The bathroom he had defiled with my sister was now his prison cell, and the only way out was a walk of shame past the neighbors. The officer's voice was the final gavel striking down Grant's delusion. He stepped forward, his hand resting casually but firmly on his belt. "Mr. Harrison, you have heard the lady. You are trespassing on private property owned by the A&D Trust. You have exactly 3 minutes to vacate the premises before I place you under arrest." Grant looked around the bathroom frantically. His eyes darted from the officer to me, and finally to the walk-in closet where his bespoke Italian suits were hanging. "Fine," he spat, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "I will leave, but I am taking my things. I am not leaving without my clothes, my watches, and my laptop." He pushed past the officer and made a dash for the closet. Brittany followed him, snatching up her designer handbag from the vanity. "Not so fast," Ms. Parker said, her voice stopping them in their tracks. She signaled to the second officer, who stepped in front of the closet door, blocking Grant's path. Grant stopped short, his chest heaving. "What now?" he screamed. "Those are my things. I bought them. Actually, Ms. Parker said, consulting her clipboard, "You purchased them using a joint credit card linked to Audrey's primary account." In the state of Washington, assets acquired during marriage are considered community property until divided by a court. However, since we have evidence of significant dissipation of marital assets for illicit purposes, we have filed an emergency motion to freeze all movable assets. She looked over her glasses at him. "That means nothing leaves this house. No suits, no electronics, no jewelry. And certainly not that Rolex on the nightstand, which was a gift from Audrey, and is therefore subject to revocation under the infidelity clause." Grant looked like he was about to have a stroke. "You cannot be serious. You expect me to walk out of here in a towel." I stepped forward. "No, Grant, I am not heartless. You can take the clothes you were wearing when you arrived." I pointed to the pile of clothes on the floor. "And you can take your toiletries. Anything else with a value of over $500 stays here until a judge decides otherwise." Brittany shrieked, clutching her Hermes bag to her chest. "This bag cost $12,000. You cannot keep it. It is mine." The officer reached out and gently but firmly removed the bag from her grip. "Then it stays here, ma'am. If you try to remove it, we will charge you with theft of marital assets." The realization of what was happening finally broke them. They were being stripped of their armor. Without the expensive suits, without the luxury accessories, without the status symbols, they were just two cheaters caught in a lie. Grant dressed hurriedly in his wrinkled trousers and shirt, his hands shaking so badly he could barely button his cuffs. He tried to slide his laptop into his jacket, but the officer saw him. "Leave it," the officer barked. Grant slammed the laptop down on the counter. "This is theft, Audrey. I have important work files on there." I smiled. "I know. And since you did that work while employed by my company on a laptop purchased by my company, that data belongs to me too." Packed into a corner with no legal leg to stand on, Grant and Brittany were forced to retreat. They looked small. They looked cheap. For years they had defined themselves by the things I bought them. Now, stripped of those things, they were nothing. "Let's go," the officer said, steering them toward the door. I watched them walk out of the master bedroom. Brittany was barefoot, carrying her heels, because she could not walk in them without her confidence. Grant looked like a deflated balloon. They left behind the life they thought they deserved and walked toward the reality they had actually earned. The descent down the floating staircase was a pathetic reverse of the grand entrance they usually made. Typically, Grant walked down these stairs adjusting his cufflinks like he owned the world, while Brittany would glide down in her designer heels waiting for compliments. Today they were being marched down like common criminals, flanked by uniformed officers. Their heads hung low to avoid eye contact with the cleaning staff, who had gathered in the hallway to watch. The heavy front door swung open, and the bright afternoon sun of Seattle hit them like a spotlight. In a neighborhood like Highlands, Privacy is an illusion that we pay millions for, but never actually receive. The flashing blue lights of the two patrol cars parked in my circular driveway had done their job. The audience had assembled. Mrs. Higgins from next door was pretending to trim her hedges, but her shears were not moving. The breathless jogger from down the street had stopped to tie his shoe for the third time. Even the delivery driver for Amazon had paused his scanner to watch the spectacle. They all saw it. Grant Harrison, the man who bragged about his golf handicap and his stock portfolio, was being escorted out of his mansion by the police wearing wrinkled clothes and looking like he had not slept in a week. Beside him, Brittany clutched her chest, trying to hide her face with her hair barefoot on the asphalt because she had been forbidden from taking the shoes that were technically marital assets. I walked calmly through the master bedroom out onto the private balcony that overlooked the driveway. The cool breeze felt cleansing against my skin. I leaned against the wrought iron railing, the cold metal grounding me. From up here, they looked like ants. Small, insignificant ants who had bitten the wrong person. Grant looked up and saw me. For a moment, I saw the flash of hatred in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by the realization of his reality. He shouted something, but the wind carried it away. He looked at his car, a sleek Porsche parked near the fountain, and reached into his pocket. His face fell. The keys were in the bowl on the foyer table inside. He was stranded. Brittany was sobbing openly now. She realized there was no Uber coming to save her. She turned to Damon, who had walked out behind the officers. She reached for his arm, but he sidestepped her with a grace that was almost balletic. He walked past her to his own truck, got in, and started the engine. He did not look back. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast. It was not a toast to their health or happiness. It was a toast to the silence they were leaving behind. The police officer pointed down the long driveway, indicating that they needed to keep moving off the property line. As they began the long, humiliating walk down the hill toward the main gate, dragging their feet on the pavement, I took the final sip of my wine. It tasted like justice. Rich, complex, and leaving a warm feeling in my chest. The trash had finally taken itself out. I walked back inside from the balcony, and the house felt different. It was lighter, as if the very air had been purified by their departure. But I knew the silence was only temporary. The mechanism of my family's dysfunction was predictable, like a clockwork machine. When the golden child falls, the enabler is summoned to cushion the landing. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water this time, needing a clear head for round 2. My phone began to vibrate on the marble countertop. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was, but I looked anyway. The screen lit up with the word, Mother. Not Mom, not Mommy, just Mother. A title she demanded but rarely earned. I let it ring 3 times. I took a sip of water. I adjusted my silk cuff. Then I slid my thumb across the screen and put it on speaker. Audrey Elizabeth. The voice on the other end shrieked before I could even say hello. Have you lost your mind? I just got off the phone with your sister. She is hysterical. She is standing on the side of the road barefoot. How could you be so cruel? I leaned against the counter, listening to the familiar cadence of her rage. It was always like this. In Patricia's world, Brittany's actions were never the problem, only my reactions to them. She slept with my husband, Mother, I said, keeping my voice flat. In my house. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Patricia snapped. It was a mistake. People make mistakes, Audrey. But you do not throw family out on the street like garbage. You do not humiliate your sister and your husband in front of the entire neighborhood. Do you have any idea what Mrs. Higgins is going to say at the club tomorrow? You have ruined our reputation. There it was, the core of the issue. It was not about my heartbreak or the betrayal of her son-in-law. It was about her reputation at the country club. It was about how this reflected on her. They ruined their own reputation, I replied. I just expedited the process, and they are not on the street. They are walking toward the gate. I am sure Grant can call one of his drinking buddies to pick them up, since you raised a daughter who does not know how to call an Uber. Audrey, You listen to me right now, Patricia shouted, her voice trembling with indignation. You will let them back in, you will apologize, and you will sit down and discuss this like adults. Marriage is about compromise. You cannot just throw Grant away because he stumbled. He did not stumble, Mother, I said, cutting her off. He fell into a jacuzzi with his sister-in-law. And I am not compromising on my dignity. You are a cold, vindictive girl, Patricia spat. You always have been. You think just because you have money, you can control everyone. Well, you are going to fix this. Do you hear me? Fix this right now, or... I did not wait for the threat. I knew what was coming. Threats of disowning me. Threats of cutting me off from family holidays. Empty threats from a woman who had no leverage left. I am done fixing things, Mother, I said. Go pick them up if you are so worried. I tapped the red icon ending the call. The silence returned instantly, but I knew she would call back. She would call and call until I submitted because that is how she operated. She wore people down. I looked at her name on my screen. I tapped the small information icon next to it. I scrolled down to the bottom of the list. My finger hovered over the option written in red text. Block this caller. I pressed it. A pop-up asked me to confirm. I tapped yes. For the first time in 34 years, I had silenced the voice that told me I was wrong for demanding respect. It felt terrified. It felt exhilarating. I set the phone down. The queen had been blocked, but I knew the king and queen were already on their way to storm the castle in person. I had about 20 minutes to prepare the drawbridge. 30 minutes. That was exactly how long it took for the cavalry of dysfunction to arrive. I was sitting in the living room allowing the silence to settle around me when the front door shook. It was not a polite knock. It was a heavy, demanding pounding that threatened to crack the frosted glass. I did not need to check the security camera to know who it was. I knew that rhythm. It was the sound of my mother, Patricia, demanding an audience. I walked to the door, my movements slow and deliberate. I was not afraid. I was just exhausted by the predictability of it all. I unlocked the door, and before I could even step back, they pushed their way inside. My father came first, looking red-faced and uncomfortable, followed closely by my mother, who looked like she was ready to burn the house down. She did not look at my face to see if I had been crying. She did not ask how I was holding up after finding my husband in bed with her other daughter. She did not offer a hug or a single word of comfort. Instead, she threw her designer purse onto the entryway table, my table, and turned on me with eyes full of accusation. "I hope you are proud of yourself," she hissed, her voice vibrating with misplaced anger. "I just passed your sister on the highway. She is walking Audrey, walking like a vagrant on the side of the road." People were staring. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is for us? Do you know who I am in this town?" I stared at her, marveling at her priorities. "She slept with my husband, Mother," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "In my bathtub, in the home that I pay for." Patricia waved her hand dismissively, as if I had complained about Grant leaving the toilet seat up. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she scoffed. "Men make mistakes, Audrey. It is in their nature to stray sometimes. Grant is a young, successful man with needs. If you were home more often, instead of chasing your little career, maybe he would not have looked elsewhere. You drove him to it with your coldness. You cannot expect a man to wait around while you play boss." The words hit me like a physical slap, but I did not flinch. She was actually blaming me. She was standing in my foyer, rewriting reality to make the victim the villain. And to drag Brittany into this, she continued, her voice rising to a shriek. "She is your little sister, your flesh and blood. You are supposed to protect her, not destroy her life over a moment of weakness. She is young. She did not know what she was doing. You are the older one. You are supposed to be the mature one. You should have been the bigger person and handled this quietly." My father nodded in agreement, finally chiming in from the corner. "Your mother is right, Audrey. You went too far calling the police. We settle things inside the family. We do not air our dirty laundry for the neighbors to see. You have embarrassed us all today. I looked at them standing in the foyer of the house I bought defending the people who betrayed me. The realization washed over me cold and final. They did not love me. They tolerated me as long as I was useful, as long as I kept the peace. But the moment I inconvenienced their golden child, I became the enemy. I am not the bigger person anymore, I said, stepping back to create distance between us. I am the person who signs the checks. And right now, I am the person who is done listening to you justify their cruelty. I looked at my parents standing in my foyer, the air thick with their misplaced judgment, and I decided to detonate the nuclear option. If my words would not convince them, maybe high-definition evidence would. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen connecting to the living room display. I did not play the video of them naked as that would be undignified. Instead, I played the audio recording of their conversation from the moment I locked the bathroom door. Grant's voice filled the high ceilings of the entryway, amplified and clear. "She is an ice queen," he sneered on the recording. "You are the only one who understands me, baby." Then came Brittany's giggle, distinct and cruel. "She does not deserve you, Grant. She treats you like an employee." I watched my mother's face, waiting for the shame. I was waiting for the horror of realizing her youngest daughter was sleeping with her eldest daughter's husband. I expected her to cover her mouth, to gasp, to look at me with an apology in her eyes. But the shame never came. Patricia rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at the sound of her son-in-law betraying her daughter. "Turn that off," she snapped, waving her manicured hand as if shooing away a fly. "It is vulgar, Audrey. Recording people in private is a violation of trust. I cannot believe you would stoop so low." I paused, the recording, my hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from pure disbelief. "Mom, did you hear what they said? He is admitting to sleeping with her. She is mocking me. This is not a misunderstanding. This is an affair." Patricia sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a martyr. "I heard a man who is lonely, Audrey. I heard a man who is crying out for affection because his wife is too busy climbing the corporate ladder to keep his bed warm. And I heard a sister who stepped in to comfort him when you were absent. If you had prioritized your marriage instead of your ego, maybe Grant would not have needed to look elsewhere. You drove him to this." The world stopped spinning for a second. There it was, the undeniable proof that I could never win. In the twisted cord of my family, I was guilty by default. If Grant cheated, it was because I worked too hard. If Brittany betrayed me, it was because I was not supportive enough. I was the scapegoat. I had always been the scapegoat. I was the one who fixed the problems and took the blame, while Brittany was the golden child who created the chaos and received the sympathy. I looked at my father, hoping for a sliver of rationality. "Dad," I said, my voice quiet, "you cannot agree with this. You cannot think this is my fault." He shifted his weight, looking down at the expensive Persian rug rather than meeting my eyes. He was a weak man, I realized. A man who had spent 40 years bowing to my mother's delusions to keep the peace. "Your mother has a point, Audrey," he mumbled. "You have been very distant lately. You cannot blame Grant for seeking connection. And Brittany is sensitive. You know she needs guidance, not judgment." I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the snapping of the final tether. The invisible cord that had bound me to their approval for 34 years finally broke. I realized then that no amount of success, no amount of money, and no amount of truth would ever make them love me the way they loved her. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a doormat. And I was done lying down. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and felt absolutely nothing. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a clarity that was sharp and cold like a diamond. For years I had played by their rules. I had bought the gifts, hosted the holidays, and swallowed the insults, hoping that one day they would look at me with the same adoration they gave to Brittany. But standing there in my foyer, with the evidence of my husband's infidelity being dismissed as a mistake, I realized the game was rigged. I could never win because to them I was not a player, I was just the bank. I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. You are right, Mother, I said, my voice steady and loud enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling. Brittany is your daughter, Grant is your son-in-law. They are family, and since you are so concerned about their well-being, I have a solution. Patricia looked at me, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I walked to the front door and pulled it open wide, letting the cool evening air rush into the heated tension of the hallway. I am saying that they are your problem now. If you think what they did is acceptable, then you can house them. You can feed them. You can pay for their clothes and their lifestyle. Because as of this moment, the Bank of Audrey is permanently closed. My father stepped forward, looking alarmed. Now, Audrey, be reasonable. You cannot just cut everyone off. We are your parents. I looked him dead in the eye. I am being reasonable, Dad. I am removing the toxic elements from my life. And right now that includes you. You stood there and watched Mom blame me for Grant cheating. You stood there and let her call me cruel for protecting myself. You made your choice. You chose them. So go be with them. Patricia gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so cliché, it would have been funny if it were not so pathetic. You are kicking us out. From your own house. You will regret this, Audrey. You will be all alone in this big empty mansion, and you will come crawling back to us begging for forgiveness. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, free and unburdened. Mother, look around you. I built this. I own this. I do not need you to survive. But let us see how long Brittany lasts when she has to ask you for money instead of stealing it from me. Let us see how much you love Grant when he is unemployed and sleeping on your couch. I pointed to the open door. Get out, both of you, and do not come back until you are ready to apologize to me. And I mean a real apology, not one of your gaslighting lectures. Patricia turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. She grabbed her purse and marched out the door, her heels clicking angrily on the stone. You are a cold, heartless girl, she spat as she passed me. I have no daughter. Good, I replied. Then you won't mind losing my number. My father looked at me one last time, a flicker of regret in his eyes, but he was too weak to act on it. He followed her out, like he always did, a shadow to her fire. I slammed the heavy front door shut. The sound was like a gunshot, final and decisive. I engaged the deadbolt. Click, click. I turned around and leaned my back against the wood, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. The house was silent, completely and utterly silent. There was no husband lying to me upstairs. There was no sister stealing from me. There were no parents judging me. I was alone. And for the first time in my life, being alone did not feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. The war for my family was over. Now the war for my empire was about to begin. The sun had barely risen over the Seattle skyline when Grant marched into the lobby of Lux Living headquarters. He was running on adrenaline and the delusional belief that if he moved fast enough, he could outrun the truth. He wore one of the few suits I had allowed him to keep, a navy blue number that was slightly too tight around the shoulders. A subtle reminder that he was no longer living in the custom-tailored world he had grown accustomed to. He did not go to his office first. He went straight to the server room on the 4th floor. He cornered Kevin, our director of IT, before the poor man had even finished his first cup of coffee. Grant slammed his hand on Kevin's desk, causing a stack of coding manuals to topple over. I want Audrey's access revoked, he demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet open-plan office. Cut her email. Disable her keycard. Lock her out of the shared drive. Do it now. Kevin blinked, confused and terrified. Sir, Mrs. Harrison is the founder. I cannot just lock her out of her own company. I am the CEO, Grant, shouted, his eyes wild. And I am telling you, she is a security risk. She is having a mental breakdown. She is vindictive and unstable. If she logs in, she will sabotage our data. Do you want to be responsible for losing the client database, Kevin? Do you want to be fired for insubordination? Kevin looked at Grant's shaking hands and the sweat beading on his forehead. He did what most employees do when faced with a screaming executive. He complied. He typed the command and hit enter. In Grant's mind, that keystroke was a victory. He thought he had just cut off my oxygen. In reality, he had just cut the brake line on a car he was driving toward a cliff. Grant marched to his corner office, slamming the door shut. He sat at his mahogany desk, the desk I paid for, and opened his laptop. He began typing furiously. He needed to control the narrative before I arrived. He needed the entire company to view me as a liability, not a leader. At 7:15 a.m., a notification pinged on the phones of all 200 Lux Living employees. The subject line read, "Urgent Leadership Update." I read it from my tablet while sitting at my kitchen island, sipping an espresso. The email was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. "Dear team," it began. "It is with a heavy heart that I announce Audrey is taking an indefinite leave of absence effective immediately. Due to recent personal struggles, she is seeking necessary psychological treatment to address severe emotional instability. During this difficult time, I will be assuming full control of all creative and operational decisions to ensure the stability of our company. Please respect her privacy and direct all urgent matters to me." I put the tablet down and laughed. He had actually done it. He had put it in writing. He had used his company email account to libel the majority shareholder and claim I was mentally unstable without a shred of medical evidence. He thought this email was his shield. He did not realize he had just handed me the weapon I needed to activate the immediate termination clause in his contract. Grant leaned back in his chair in that glass office, feeling like a king. He watched the employees trickling in, seeing them whisper and look at their phones. He thought they were whispering about my breakdown. He did not realize they were whispering about him. Because what Grant forgot was that loyalty in business is not bought with titles, it is bought with respect. And while he was playing CEO, I was already on the phone with the board members he tried to deceive. The corporate war had started and he had just fired the first shot at a tank. By 9 o'clock, the office was no longer a place of business. It was a rumor mill churning out fiction at a record pace. Grant's email had lit the match, but Brittany was the one pouring gasoline on the flames. She arrived at the office wearing large sunglasses and a somber expression, playing the role of the concerned sister to perfection. Despite being stripped of her luxury assets the night before, she walked into the marketing department with her head held high, ready to spin the narrative of her life. She did not hide in her office. She went on a calculated tour. She stopped by the break room where the sales team gathered. She lingered at the receptionist's desk where the administrative assistants gossiped. Her voice was hushed and conspiratorial, designed to draw people in like moths to a flame. "It is just so tragic," she whispered to a group of junior copywriters, wiping away a non-existent tear. "Audrey has been under so much pressure lately. We tried to ignore the signs, but last night she finally snapped. She attacked Grant and me. She locked us in a bathroom and started screaming about affairs that were not happening. She was hallucinating. We are just trying to get her the help she needs before she hurts herself or the company." The staff ate it up. It was the kind of office drama that made the workday go faster. They nodded sympathetically, looking at the empty CEO office, with pity, not realizing they were mourning a leader who was perfectly sane and currently plotting their liberation from her kitchen table. Brittany framed herself as the victim and Grant as the hero, stepping up to save the sinking ship. It was a brilliant marketing campaign for a product that was completely fraudulent. But while Brittany was busy winning the war of words down in the architectural studio, Damon was winning the war of assets. The atmosphere in his department was different. It was the quiet intensity of a bomb squad. Damon did not gossip. He did not read Grant's email twice. He simply walked to the secure archives where the physical blueprints were stored. He began pulling the master files. These were not just sketches. These were the proprietary blueprints for our 3 biggest upcoming eco-villages. The technical specifications, the structural calculations, and the zoning approvals. This was the intellectual property that justified our stock valuation. He rolled them up one by one, placing them into waterproof black tubes. A junior architect watched him with wide eyes. "Damon, what are you doing?" the young man asked nervously. "Grant said we are on lockdown." Damon did not stop packing. He did not look up. He slid a hard drive into his briefcase. Grant says a lot of things, Damon replied, his voice low and steady. But Grant cannot draw a straight line with a ruler. I suggest you update your resume, kid. Changes are coming. He closed his briefcase with a snap. It was the only sound in the room. While the rest of the company was distracted by Britney's soap opera, Damon had quietly secured the heart of the business. Grant could sit in the CEO chair all day, but without the designs Damon held in his hands, he was the captain of a ship with no engine. The silence in Damon's office was deafening compared to the noise in the hallway. It was the silence of a man who knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were and was preparing to pull the pin. The emergency shareholder meeting began at 10 o'clock sharp in the glass-walled conference room that offered a panoramic view of the city I had conquered. Grant stood at the head of the long mahogany table, a spot that I usually occupied. He was wearing that same ill-fitting navy suit, but he wore it with the unearned confidence of a man who believed his own press release. Around the table sat the 12 board members, including several old friends of my father, who looked uncomfortable and kept checking their watches. Grant cleared his throat and launched into the performance of a lifetime. He did not use notes. He relied on his natural charisma, the same charm that had fooled me for 5 years. He spoke about duty. He spoke about sacrifice. He painted a picture of a company in crisis, not because of financial mismanagement or market shifts, but because of my alleged emotional collapse. "We all love Audrey Grant," said his voice dripping with a sickening faux sympathy. "She is the visionary who started Lux Living. But we cannot let sentimentality sink this ship. The Audrey we knew is gone. The woman who attacked me and her sister yesterday is not the leader this company needs. Her behavior was erratic, violent, and deeply disturbing. She is a danger to herself, and more importantly, she is a danger to the integrity of our brand." He paused for effect, looking around the room to make eye contact with each member. He was playing on their fears. He knew that investors hate volatility, and he was framing me as the ultimate variable. He did not mention the affair. He did not mention the divorce. He framed his coup as a rescue mission. "We need stability." Grant continued, slamming his hand softly on the table for emphasis. "We need a steady hand at the wheel. I have stepped up to take on the burden of leadership during this tragic time. I am asking for your vote of confidence today, not for me, but for the hundreds of employees who rely on us for their livelihood. We must move forward with a formal motion to remove Audrey from her operational duties permanently." The room was silent. I could imagine the older board members nodding slowly. They were men of my father's generation, men who found it much easier to believe that a woman was hysterical than to believe a man was a liar. They liked Grant. He played golf with them. He laughed at their bad jokes. To them, he was a safe bet. Grant smiled internally. He could feel the room swaying in his direction. He thought he had won. He thought the doors were locked and his narrative was secure. He had no idea that while he was busy selling them a story of my destruction, I was standing in the elevator lobby adjusting my blazer and checking my lipstick in the reflection of the glass doors. He was talking about stability,